Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so Jimmy Kimmel made his heroic return to his late night show as of last night, and he did a long monologue addressing what happened, the politics of the situation, etc. He did not apologize, although he offered a decent amount of contrition in terms of clarifying that he didn't mean to make fun of Charlie Kirk's murder, and that he didn't mean to imply that it was any one group that did do this murder. But, you know, he didn't say sorry, and he expressed a fair amount of emotion in terms of Charlie Kirk's wife mourning him and being willing to forgive the killer at this giant pageant Nazi rally that they had about it. I'm withholding my willingness to give too much credit for that particular act of forgiveness, just because if it doesn't actually bring the temperature down and stop the federal government from going after innocent people who had nothing to do with Charlie Kirk's murder, just on the basis of them being Antifa or trans or whatever, then this forgiveness means nothing, right? If it's really a gesture of forgiveness, then the entire temperature of this situation can simmer down and people can back off of this desire to go out and like retributively murder others. But I don't feel like that's where this is going to go. So let me play a little bit of this monologue. I think he did a good job here. There's more at play, obviously, than Jimmy Kimmel's show. Ultimately, this is just kind of a flash in the pan. And as for whether or not Sinclair and Nexstar have changed their tune about whether they're going to bring Jimmy Kimmel back on their stations, we don't know that yet. We'll find out. Maybe by the time you hear this podcast, they'll have made a decision about that. But as of right now, only ABC has brought him back, and Sinclair and Nexstar are still holding out their forgiveness, so to speak. So let's watch this clip real quick. This is what Jimmy Kimmel had to say after being canceled.
I've been hearing a lot about what I need to say and do tonight, and the truth is, I don't think what I have to say is going to make much of a difference. If you like me, you like me. If you don't, you don't. I have no illusions about changing anyone's mind. But I do want to make something clear because it's important to me as a human, and that is, you understand that it was never my intention to make light of the murder of a young man. I don't think there's anything funny about it. I posted a message on Instagram on the day he was killed, sending love to his family and asking for compassion, and I meant it, and I still do. Nor was it my intention to blame any specific group for the actions of what it was obviously a deeply disturbed individual. That was really the opposite of the point I was trying to make, but I understand that to some that felt either ill-timed or unclear, or maybe both. And for those who think I did point a finger, I get why you're upset. If the situation was reversed, there's a good chance I'd have felt the same way. This show is not important. What is important is that we get to live in a country that allows us to have a show like this. Yeah! I've had the opportunity to meet and spend time with comedians and talk show hosts from countries like Russia, countries in the Middle East, who tell me they would get thrown in prison for making fun of those in power, and worse than being thrown in prison. They know how lucky we are here. Our freedom to speak is what they admire most about this country. And that's something I'm embarrassed to say I took for granted until they pulled my friend Steven off the air and tried to coerce the affiliates who run our show in the cities that you live in to take my show off the air. That's not legal. That's not American. That is un-American, and it is so dangerous. Should the government be allowed to regulate which podcasts the cell phone companies and Wi-Fi providers are allowed to let you download to make sure they serve the public interest? You think that sounds crazy? No! 10 years ago, this sounded crazy. Brendan Carr, the chairman of the FCC, telling an American company, we can do this the easy way or the hard way, and that these companies can find ways to change conduct and take action on Kimmel, or there's going to be additional work for the FCC ahead. In addition to being a direct violation of the First Amendment, is not a particularly intelligent threat to make in public. But it wasn't always like this. There was an FCC commissioner back in 2022 who worked under Joe Biden who was spot on. He wrote, "President Biden is right. Political satire is one of the oldest and most important forms of free speech. It challenges those in power while using humor to draw more people into the discussion. That's why people in influential positions have always targeted it for censorship." You know who wrote that? FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr, who later was appointed chairman of the FCC by this former crusader for free speech.
If we don't have free speech, then we just don't have a free country. It's as simple as that. If this most fundamental right is allowed to perish, then the rest of our rights and liberties will topple. Just like dominoes, one by one, they'll go down.
That was also in 2022. And I wonder, how did that guy turn into this guy?
Who would you like to see replace Kimmel on late night?
Well, a lot of people, anybody could replace him. The guy had no talent. Kimmel look, he was fired, he had no talent. He's a whack job, but he had no talent. And more importantly than talent, he had no, because a lot of people have no talent, they get ratings. But he had no ratings.
Well, I do tonight.
All right, so pretty good. I'm glad he didn't fold and offer an apology here because he really had nothing to apologize for. And, you know, I think it was the right move for him to show some emotion about this and reflect on it a little bit. He probably didn't have the room to like double down, although that would have been something he could do, kind of go even harder on Charlie Kirk. Again, maybe not about like the murder itself, but just on the person. But given that Disney obviously took a pretty big financial hit from this, they just wanted to make this go away. And as for whether or not Sinclair and Nexstar are gonna lift their embargo of the Jimmy Kimmel program, I'm not sure. That definitely could have a big impact on where the show goes from here, if it continues to air or what is even going to happen. But probably those affiliates will end up letting Jimmy back on the air just in order to maintain a good relationship with ABC. Jimmy kind of seems to hint that the affiliates were pressured by the government. So Nexstar and Sinclair were pressured by the government and made the statements they made. I don't really think that's true. These are right-wing networks. So they probably did what they did in coordination with the administration to some extent, although some pressure might have been applied. The administration might have reached out to them or something like that, and got them to make the statements that they made. But let's not pretend that the moves of Nexstar and Sinclair were not perfectly aligned with the types of organizations that they are. So the thing that saved the day here is the fact that Jimmy has an audience and people cared when they saw this. Even people in my own personal life who aren't normally that activated about politics and don't necessarily care about Jimmy Kimmel that much were very alarmed by this and saw this as a sign that the administration was, boldly going after people's free speech. Obviously, the administration has been doing that this entire time, but this was a pretty bold move. And the fact that Carr went on a podcast to openly threaten ABC and Disney was a pretty profound move. And even Jimmy Kimmel mentions here that that's a pretty stupid thing to do. That's a dumb way to initiate this pressure campaign. And they could have said the exact same thing behind the scenes, and the whole free speech angle would not have been right on Front Street. But because they chose to, as a government official, go on and pressure the company to do something about Kimmel, it made it an obvious free speech issue. And so because Kimmel has an audience, not just in terms of ratings. I don't really care about ratings. I'm not interested in examining the ratings of Kimmel's show, but he's well known. He's well known online. And when this news broke, a lot of people who might not necessarily watch his show took action. They either canceled their Disney Plus subscriptions or they passed along information about it. They expressed outrage about it. And that ultimately made a difference. I would say if you're one of the people who canceled a subscription or some, financial relationship with Disney over this, you should not reverse that decision now because they've gone back. You should hold strong on that. First of all, because we don't know what's going to happen from here. Disney could very well get rid of Kimmel in short order and hope that not as many people will talk about it, especially if there continues to be pressure from the administration. But also, if people just immediately reverse their canceled subscriptions, which I'm sure many already have, then the company's not really disciplined by that. It's one thing to say, oh, okay, they took enough of a financial hit that it scared them and made them want to get him back on the air quickly. But also, if something like this happens, the administration pressures them and then they fold immediately because they don't want the consequences from that. But then the audience disciplines them in the other direction and then they fold immediately on that and reverse course. Really, that's not them doing anything other than, in their view, quickly adapting to a situation. And so what needs to happen to Disney because of this is long-lasting consequences. There needs to be long-term implications for their bottom line based on the fact that they did this. That's the only thing that's going to prevent them from doing it again, because otherwise they just view it as this like tightrope walk, and CEOs love that shit. You know what I mean? And so it doesn't really solve the problem of companies folding under this type of pressure. So in slight relation to this, I wanted to bounce off and show you guys something that Kamala Harris said in relation to this whole Jimmy Kimmel thing. Kamala Harris has been doing a book tour. She wrote a book called 107 Days about how she lost the election, as though it's such a mystery. And she's been doing a couple interviews. She did a long interview with Rachel Maddow as well as a couple others. And she's doing a pretty good job of reminding everybody why she really wasn't up for the task. She hasn't really changed any single position. She has not indicated that she feels like she took the wrong stance on any issue, particularly Gaza, and she has only expressed being upset at the people who threatened to withhold their vote and ultimately did withhold their vote. Seems like the only thing that she has said she wishes she had done differently is saying this thing about Pete Buttigieg. I don't know, she's getting shit now because she thought about choosing Pete Buttigieg as her vice president, but then decided that it wasn't a good idea to run a gay vice president. And it's like, what are we even talking about? Pete Buttigieg would have been a terrible fucking choice. There's not a single voter in America that didn't vote for Kamala Harris but would have if Pete Buttigieg was the vice president. So this whole thing about, you didn't choose Pete Buttigieg is just dumb. It's good. It's a good thing she didn't choose Pete Buttigieg. She probably would have lost even harder. And it has nothing to do with the fact that he's gay. He's just not appealing. I mean, nobody outside of the hardcore Democrat liberal base wants Pete Buttigieg. I'm sorry if that's news to anybody. But this clip that I want to show you is her talking about this dynamic between companies and different institutions and the Trump administration. And this, above all else, I think is a reflection of the mindset of a person that simply cannot win in conditions that we are currently in. Biden has this mindset too. I think he only won because of COVID, frankly, because we've now seen two pretty decisive losses in Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris because of this type of thought process. So let me show it to you.
Become the patron saint of I told you so, in terms of people understanding the sort of warnings and predictions that you made about what Trump would be like. But you say, I predicted all of that, I warned of it. What I didn't predict was the capitulation. The billionaires lining up to grovel, the big media companies, universities, so many major law firms, I will note, including your husband's.
Yeah, and he spoke out about it.
He's been very vocal in criticizing it. He said they've all been bending to blackmail and outrageous demands.
Yeah.
Why did you not predict the capitulation? And what do you make of the effort to try to put some steel in the spine of those institutions?
So, as you know, I am a lifelong public servant. And but I've worked closely with the private sector over many years. And I always believed that if push came to shove, those titans of industry would be guardrails for our democracy, for the importance of sustaining democratic institutions. And one by one, they have been silent. They have been, yes, I use the word feckless. It's not like they're going to lose their yacht or their house in the Hamptons. And here's the thing. democracy sustains capitalism. Capitalism thrives in a democracy. And right now we are dealing with, as I called him at my speech on the ellipse, a tyrant. We used to compare the strength of our democracy to communist dictators. That's what we're dealing with right now in Donald Trump. And these titans of industry are not speaking up. And perhaps it is because his threats and the way he has used the weight of the federal government to take out vengeance on his critics is something that they fear, and I get that. I understand why they do. We've seen the demonstration of it. Perhaps it is because they want to please him and nominate him for a Nobel Prize. Perhaps it's because they want a merger approved or they want to avoid an investigation. But at some point, they've got to stand up for the sake of the people who rely on all of these institutions to have integrity and to, at some point, be the guardrails against a tyrant who is using the federal government to execute his whim and fancy because of a fragile ego.
All right, so aside from this thing about her being the patron saint of I told you so, which I just find so completely out of touch. This is exactly how they were behaving when Hillary Clinton lost, but this time it's even worse. And I will say that Kamala Harris's campaign, I'll give them credit that they did a good job putting information out about Project 2025. They talked a lot about it. They effectively made the election about it, even though it didn't work and Trump still won. But they did make an effort to make the election about Project 2025. And now it's clear that Trump's presidency is about Project 2025. So they were right about a Trump presidency and what it would look like. But it's actually not that hard to be right about that. We all kind of knew that. And the best thing they did was dig deep into the details of Project 2025 and get people talking about that. But guess what? It still didn't work. So I don't see why this person has the right to say, I told you so, to anybody. I think the people who are saying, I told you so, are the people who said to you that you are going to lose the election unless you change your tune on Gaza. And it seems to me that the biggest problem with your campaign was that you didn't have enough people around you who were saying things to you like that. And if you did, it's possible that you would not have lost so many winnable votes. And the Democrats are always telling us that we have to reach out to these voters that voted for Republicans, they voted for Donald Trump, they're independents and we lost them. And maybe they voted for Obama and whatever. We got to figure out why these people are supporting Trump. Instead of saying that we have to reach out to the millions of voters that didn't vote at all. Democratic voters, people who showed up to vote for Biden but did not show up to vote for Kamala Harris. Those people didn't all go and vote for Trump. They just didn't show up. And what about the hundreds of thousands of people that went out and voted for the Green Party because they're a lot closer in politics to the Democratic Party than to the Republican Party, but they couldn't bring themselves to vote for Kamala Harris? Why are we never talking about reaching out to those people? It's because it would lead a person like Kamala Harris to conclusions she's not supposed to come to. And that's exactly what you see on display in this whole spiel about thinking that corporations and the titans of industry would uphold and be guardrails of our democracy. That is such an insane thing to think. It sounds to me like somebody who is abdicating their duty and their responsibility for this whatsoever. Because what you should have been doing, you and Biden, when you were in power, is actually being the guardrails against our democracy. And continuing to empower those entities that are more and more empowered no matter who is in office, and then saying, well, I thought they were going to uphold the guardrails of our democracy. No, you are a politician in the Democratic Party. It's actually literally your job to uphold those guardrails. There should be no mistaking the fact, and I want everybody to be very clear about the fact, that this is the ideology and the type of mentality that has handed you over to fascism. These are politicians who do not believe in policy that goes beyond what she's saying here. That corporations depend on democracy in order to function, which is somewhat true. And so they should want the best thing for that democracy and for all the people in it. That is delusional. That is a complete purposeful misunderstanding of how the capitalist system and how the capitalist game works. Obviously, These entities are going to do whatever they need to do to please and continue to profit under a fascist regime. That's what they do. That's what happened in Nazi Germany. Even American companies were working with Nazi Germany. On what planet are the people who have excelled the most at profiteering supposed to be the ones protecting us all from authoritarianism and fascism? That's ridiculous. And these are the same people who don't think Democrats should be talking about the word oligarchy. And so the lesson here is that there's a lot of anger in this country that can be harnessed and funneled toward positive political ends, and not violence and not civil war, but an actually transformative approach to politics. But it's going to have to be something that rejects this thought process, because all this type of politician is able to do is divert your attention towards a boogeyman like Donald Trump. But guess what? That's not working anymore. It didn't even work in the first election that you tried it. It should be clear to everyone at this point that Democrats failed to maintain control of the country and stop it from tumbling into fascism by failing to identify a systemic critique and offering a bold vision about it. But ultimately, the problem here is that this person has no vision. And that's clear from what's coming out in this book. She has no vision for what America should do going forward, what people should do who are afraid or who might be targeted by this administration, what the world looks like after this is over, if it's ever over. She has no ideas when it comes to that. And yet here she is trying to pave the way for her to run in 2028. I think we should reject this. We should reject Democrats who think like this, point blank, period.